It's great to be here today. Matt spoke about being happy to be with this crowd. I just thought, I'm just happy to be part of a crowd. And according to my taking on the parties last night and the sort, I think many of you are also excited to be part of a crowd. So thank you, John. Thank you, Luigi. I want to give you some time to just introduce you and your organizations to get us going.
Sure. So hi, I'm John. I'm with Citi. I run what we call business intelligence and process reengineering for markets operations. Markets operations is the group that supports the markets business at Citi, which is an $18 billion business. And the operations group that we support is almost 3,500 people globally, spread across 89 cities across the world. So we have a lot of bespoke, complex processes that we would like to automate more.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Luigi?
Yes, so this is Luigi Migliaccio. I am the Group Chief Customer Operation for PosteItaliane. And in my role, I am responsible for back office activities, customer care, and quality management for the entire PosteItaliane group. Just give you some hints about PosteItaliane because it's a very local company in Italy. It was founded actually 160 years ago, and before the unification of Italy itself. It's a company that started as a postal services, but then evolved and just around 2000 entered in the banking, insurance, payments, telecommunication, and soon we will also enter in the energy market. We have 128,000 employees, 12,800 branches spread all across Italy. You can bet that any place you go in Italy, you will find a postal office. And my personal organization is about 7,000 people that now fully leverage the Appian solution.
Fantastic. Well, I'm delighted to have you both here. Both of your organizations are very large and very ambitious in more than one way. So I want to ask you if you can describe what is the goal, what is the objective of the transformation that you are driving in your companies?
Sure. I mean, for us, it really comes from Jane Fraser, our CEO, which is to simplify our bank. And for us in markets operations, our mission is really to empower our people, to develop better solutions, to be more data-driven, to digitize our workflows and in a robust and controlled way and provide excellent client service and client experience to our clients. And so our transformation, in one word, is to simplify and to use, and we would like to do that by using data to drive continuous process improvement through our flows. It helps obviously with our goals and objectives, and also helps with our retention and hiring of people to feel like that their role is to really drive continuous process improvement to simplify our bank.
Nice, excellent. Thank you, John. Luigi?
We'll do the same thing as John. No, just joking. Building on it, we had mainly two objectives when we started the transformation. So the first one was to fully digitalize our processes that were still mix of human and paper. So the first ambition was to have a full digitalized process. And the second was even more important because we want to change the culture of our operator. Because before the Appian implementation, we had a very fragmented process support. So when you have to do a service activation of any kind, you go from the experts, the operators that are expert of CRM system, for example, then they do their task and they pass the ticket to the expert on another system. We use a lot the mainframe, so you have these fantastic 3270 interfaces that require a lot of knowledge and expertise. And then you go to the next IT system that in some cases the ERP system. So you need another set of people that work with this other system. We want to completely make the focus of our operator not to be on the task on the IT system, but to be on the customer service end to end. So what we want to do is to give the responsibility of fulfill a customer request to a single operator. And we did it by having Appian, orchestrating the process from A to Z, end to end. And we use robotic process automation in order to make easier for a single operator to interact with all these different systems. So you don't need to be an expert and know the very user-friendly 3270 interface of the mainframe. You just have the GUI from the UX designed for the process, and you fully focus on solving the customer problem end to end. So, and we achieved that. So,
yeah, fantastic. Both of your organizations are not only large but also very old, relatively speaking. You made me remember some of my customers that had similar situations, and very large and old companies have a lot of internal complexity. So the notion of simplifying, the notion of unifying processes and so on sounds simple, but it's actually incredibly hard. One of these customers was actually thinking about starting a new company and transferring the customers because of the internal complexity was so difficult to manage. No? Now, these transformations normally are long journeys. They have ups and downs and sometimes human drama. Can you share with us some of the difficult parts of the journey?
Sure. I mean, for us, when we started looking at low-code tools and Appian specifically, we were really driven to it by very manual, task-driven processes without really understanding the end-to-end process. So when we started our journey, we actually worked with the Pro Services group, but we also brought in a team to, we also brought in Appian Pro Services to train us and work with us side by side so that we got trained up. And the first application that we built, in my group at least, looked at reconciliations, which is a huge thing in our industry, but we don't really understand the root causes of those breaks, what's causing those issues. And so the first thing we did, though, is redesign the process front to back, understood what the metrics need to be, who needs to be involved, what the handoffs need to be, what the KPIs need to be. And then we used Appian to kind of digitize that workflow. But the one thing that I would say to anybody, and I've talked to a lot of people at Citi who come to us and ask about, what use Appian is, you have to have a plan to be sustainable. You have to know, like, how are you going to care and feed the app? How are you going to grow it? And how are you going to pull in other elements of a very disjointed process? So the next thing we did, and we built it on our own, was to actually build an app in Appian that manages the agreements that underpin the reason for the breaks. And by pulling these pieces of data together, the exception over here and the root cause of it and the status of that, we can prioritize. It's a very simple example, but we can prioritize those agreements that are driving the largest number of breaks, the largest number of P&L impact, the largest number of client experience. Now, it was a small use case, right? We didn't change the world in that one. But the thing we knew from the very beginning is we have to be sustainable, we have to build our own capability, we have to start working with different users and think about how we evolve this journey and start to pull it all together in a single view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think made a wonderful example of what connected possibilities really means in enterprise.
Right.
Fantastic. Luigi?
So, at the beginning, our expectation was to be very fast. When you talk about low code, the expectation is that you start being agile, like a magic word, that everything will be done in weeks. And so this was an expectation, but it didn't happen in the first year. So now, of course, we are very agile, and as I say sometimes, that we think Appian. Means that we think that we can work together, IT and business, and in so-called sprints. So in a week time, you elaborate what you need to do, start developing something, see the outcome, rework it. It's an iterative process that takes 2-3 weeks, and then you have the outcome that you need. This was completely unbelievable only a few years ago. I'm not saying that we at PosteItaliane develop everything in 3 weeks, no. But when it comes to new processes, automating or changing, do some small process engineering, or set up from scratch a new process, then it's a matter of weeks now. It's not a matter of months or even years. So this is a great achievement. But at the beginning, we struggled first because the expectation was to do it immediately. Second, because of course, the competence. Technology is never the solution to all your problems. You always have to have a deep understanding of the processes that you are working on, and then you need to understand, how to transfer, this new knowledge and this new way of working to your people. I'll give you also an example of. We developed what is called disconoscimenti, that is when you do not recognize a transaction on your bank account, so it's normally a fraud. And according to the Bank of Italy, we as PosteItaliane need to elaborate the request of the customer, the claim of the customer within 24 hours. So we were struggling because we had a lot of frauds, and actually the backlog started to increase. We introduced the Appian solution, and we were hoping that the day after we should manage the backlog, manage the peak, and everything was doing well. On the other side, what happened is that instead of taking maybe 10 minutes per claim, it took 12 minutes, 13 minutes. How it is possible? And then we find out, going to see how the operator were working, is that the operator didn't trust the solution. So they were doing their manual activities in parallel to using the Appian console, and then matching if the result was the same, and so on. So doing that, of course, it took more time. But after a while, by themselves, the people find out that the solution was working. The results were exactly the same. Then they stopped doing these manual activities, and they speed up, and we solve our problem.
Yeah, just one thing you mentioned about Agile. Actually, we were talking about this yesterday. One of the things I've really been pleased about is, because we work in an industry that didn't start Agile, right? We're a 150-year-old company or something like that. But I actually found Appian has helped us get the Agile model up and running, not just from a technology perspective, but from a user perspective, from accountability, from participation, from feeling that they own the solution. It's not something that was just thrown at them. And because of the interactive way we can do things in low code, I really felt that's really come out more and more in our teams and our operations teams.
Yeah, fantastic. You just, to be clarified, part of the transformation that I think is essential when organizations take this journey is the transformation of how the business and IT work together. And what low code does is it allows organizations to co-create really fast and give each other feedback in a way that has never happened before. And that is actually transformational. Many organizations find it as a clear opening to new possibilities. No? Can you say more about this notion of what has changed between the relationship between IT and the business, given your experience so far?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely it's coupled to me in the Agile model, right? In the sense that we want to, with our IT partners, do more Agile development, think about things in feasible chunks, understand user stories, groom them properly, take us through that process. And with Appian, obviously it's a low-code tool. There's some traditional technology in some places is a little suspicious and unsure of low code, and there's obviously a fear of us creating macros and what we used to call EUCs and UDAs that nobody owns and nobody manages and aren't cataloged properly, and we have to put the structures around that. But I think our organization across at the enterprise level is starting to come around and think about it more and more. And we don't sit in technology, we sit in operations, we are users, but we don't deploy the code, we don't do the production support, we don't do the release management, but we are developing and coding, and we need to partner with them and also think about how low code can help in implement some of the larger platforms as a pulling together of data in one single source.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, John.
So as I said before, now after a few years, we are let's say agile. So we are working together with the business. And we broke the rules. We are not following the so-called V model with the requirements that are designed by someone, and then comes to the feasibility study, and then from feasibility study to development test. And while you do it, the requirements have changed completely. So you deliver always something that's out of sync. Now, of course, for certain processes, we are able to work together on a daily basis and doing this iteration together. And this is from a development point of view. But what is also important is that from a back office point of view, from operation point of view, now that we have the process is fully orchestrated by the Appian platform, we have the data for each of the steps of the process. So we know in any moment what's happening to this process. Normally, always is the fault of the back office. There is a backlog of service that has not been activated. Luigi, is your problem. Now I can say, look, it's not my problem. There is the salespeople that are not doing that. Or maybe I can be proactive. So I go to the salespeople and say, look, we have this issue. You need to do this and that. You need to ask the customer to fulfill these new documents that are needed. So everything became more easier because you know what is missing, and you can be proactive and ask for them to fulfill the needs, and the process will flow very easily. So it's very important to understand that putting this layer on top of your process gives you the power of controlling the process. It is actually amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the story you just told, Luigi, makes me see how, in the traditional sense, business will define the problems that need solutions and will require technology to deliver solutions. I think the new type of collaboration is one in which the business may do some of that, but it's not the only one that does it. And technology can actually identify problems and come back to the business and say, hey, we believe there is a problem here. And the conversation may redefine the problems and the solutions in a completely different way.
True.
That's great to hear. Now, many of the people in the audience may be earlier in their journey. What advice would they give them as they embark in the use of low-code for transformational purposes?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're pretty early in our journey too. But I mean, the thing that I mentioned earlier, right, is a plan to be sustainable. If you're going to start using tools like Appian, you really need to understand, like, what is the long-term vision? How does it fit into other things? What's the roles and responsibilities for your team? What's the career path for people? Is it something that's a citizen developer on the side, or is it somebody's full-time job? And how do you, the thing we've really tried to do, and I think other organizations in our business, in our industry have seen similar things, is it's this combination of business intelligence and process reengineering. Like, that's why we're called that, because we see data as the driver for good process design and good automation outcomes, and then rinse and repeat once you get it automated. And I think you just need to think about that from the very beginning. Like, what is your data strategy? What type of people are you going to have to look at your data to make the right decisions? And then when you automate something, like, you may end up doing some automation that isn't in a perfect data model, right? We don't all live in perfect systems of record, certainly in my industry, but you need to kind of know when the path changes, how you're going to do that, and to be sustainable in the long run. Right. is something I think is really important. And, we're a change team. We're not a, all the parts work together to kind of deliver the outcome in the end, because it's all about good data analysis, process design, and then automation. Don't automate bad process.
Of course, yeah, great, thank you. Luigi?
So if I want to be a little bit academic here, I can say that you need to understand that any transformation is always a matter of process, technology, and people. So you can forget any of this. So normally, when we started, for example, with Appian, we were very focused on automation, controlling the processes. We forgot that probably our processes were not exactly the best on earth. So you need to challenge the status quo. If you need to empower and make better your process, first you need to understand what are the weaknesses of your processes, do the right re-engineering in order to maybe do the organizational changes that goes across with this transformation, and then of course the technology will be a booster. But if you have a bad process and you try to put automation on top, you don't achieve nothing. You just achieve bad things comes easier and quicker. That is not what you want, right?
Yeah, of course. You make me remember I used to tell a joke to some of our customers that I picked up from skiing. I saw a T-shirt that would say, it's not the gear, you suck. No? And so I said to organizations, yeah, most likely you need a new technology, but it's not the technology. Your organization struggles.
I'll try that.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.